When you choose to focus on yourself and remain silent, you give yourself the most valuable opportunity for internal growth and transformation. In a world full of noise, distractions, and opinions, silence becomes a powerful form of wisdom. Rather than reacting to negativity, trying to prove your worth, or constantly justifying your decisions, silence allows you to observe, reflect, and redirect your energy inward. This isn't about shutting people out, it's about tuning into your true self. By staying silent, you learn to listen more, not just to others, but to your own needs, your own feelings, and the voice of God whispering inside your soul. You begin to understand who you are without external validation or comparison. As you focus on yourself, you become more disciplined. Your time is no longer wasted on arguments, gossip, or petty matters. You start to invest your energy in becoming the best version of you. This leads to greater clarity, peace, and purpose. People may misunderstand your silence, but what matters is how you grow in the quiet. Your silence becomes strength, not weakness. It becomes a sacred space where healing, planning, and personal evolution take place. Focusing on yourself isn't selfish. It's essential. You cannot pour from an empty cup. As you grow silently, you become wiser, stronger, and more grounded, preparing yourself for greater things that God has in store for you. Focusing on yourself allows you to take control of your energy and redirect it toward things that matter most. When you stop worrying about what others think or how they perceive you, you free your mind from unnecessary stress and mental clutter. This inner freedom is what helps you build resilience, clarity, and emotional stability. Instead of constantly reacting to people's words or being influenced by their expectations, you begin to listen to your inner voice. You prioritize your mental health, your spiritual walk, your goals, and your personal development. You stop living in comparison and competition and start living in purpose. Focusing on yourself helps you notice your own habits, both healthy and unhealthy. It allows you to work on them honestly, in private, without pressure or shame. This personal accountability is how real transformation happens. You stop blaming others for your circumstances and instead take responsibility for your growth. You start to set boundaries, make intentional choices, and walk away from things that no longer serve your peace. As you continue this journey, you notice a change, not just in your surroundings, but in your mindset, your faith, and your confidence. Staying silent during this process is not just a strategy. It's a sign of maturity. Silence gives you the ability to choose your battles and walk away from drama, insults, and chaos. It's a protective barrier that keeps your peace intact. When you remain silent, you don't waste energy trying to explain yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You learn that not everything deserves your reaction. Silence becomes your armor. In the quiet, you observe more. You begin to understand others without them even saying a word. You discern intentions, spot patterns, and see truths that loud people often miss. You also realize that growth doesn't need to be announced. You can evolve silently, build silently, and heal silently. When the time is right, your results will speak louder than any words ever could. And in that silence, you're not alone. God is working with you, strengthening you, guiding you, and preparing you. Focusing on yourself means taking full ownership of your life. It is about directing your attention inward and becoming deeply aware of your actions, your thoughts, your goals, and your purpose. It is not about ignoring the world around you, but rather choosing to nurture what's within you so you can better face the world. When you focus on yourself, you begin to see how much time and energy you've wasted trying to fix others, explain yourself, or win the approval of people who don't truly understand your journey. Instead, you begin investing in your own growth, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and physically. You learn to prioritize your needs, your peace, and your healing. That doesn't make you selfish. It makes you responsible. You start developing healthy routines, engaging in quiet reflection, setting meaningful goals, and eliminating habits that no longer serve your purpose. And most importantly, you stop comparing your path with others, knowing that what God has planned for you is unique. This inward focus creates clarity and direction. It teaches you patience. It gives you power because you're no longer driven by chaos or distractions, but by intention and vision. Staying silent throughout this journey adds another level of strength. Silence is not emptiness, it's full of wisdom and power. When you stay silent, you give yourself permission to listen, not just to others, but to your inner truth and God's voice. You begin to see that silence can be a form of strategy. Not everything deserves a response. Not every situation needs your words. Some people thrive off reaction, off chaos, off drawing you into battles that don't belong to you. But when you choose silence, you deny them that access. You protect your peace and maintain your dignity. Silence teaches you patience. It allows space for God to act. Many times we speak too quickly and end up saying things we later regret. But silence allows time for clarity to form and emotions to settle. You discover that silence often says more than words ever could. It's in the silence that ideas are born, healing takes place, prayers are heard, and strength is restored. When you master silence, you master your reactions, your emotions, and ultimately your destiny. The combination of focusing on yourself and staying silent also helps you gain spiritual discernment. You begin to sense the difference between what's meant for you and what's sent to distract you. Your spiritual ears become sharper. You start to see that not every opportunity is a blessing, not every voice is worth your attention, and not every presence in your life is permanent. Silence allows room for God's direction, and focusing on yourself helps you walk that direction with confidence. You become more attuned to your purpose, more protective of your peace, and more grounded in your identity. You no longer chase validation because you find fulfillment in God and in the quiet work you're doing within. You become someone who doesn't just talk about growth, but lives it, quietly, steadily, and faithfully. Focusing on yourself allows you to break free from the constant need to be seen, heard, and validated by others. It creates space for you to truly understand who you are outside of your roles, titles, or relationships. You begin to ask yourself deeper questions. What do I want? What brings me peace? What aligns with my values and my faith? This self-exploration opens your eyes to what you've been tolerating, what's draining your energy, and what's delaying your growth. As you focus inward, you start shedding layers of people-pleasing, perfectionism, and over-explaining. You stop trying to meet everyone's expectations and instead focus on becoming someone you yourself can respect. That's when true self-love begins. Not the surface kind that's based on image, but the rooted kind that's based on truth. You begin taking care of your body with discipline, your mind with wisdom, your emotions with grace, and your spirit with prayer. You realize that peace is not something you stumble into. It's something you build intentionally by keeping your circle small, your goals clear, and your heart aligned with God. Staying silent in this process becomes a source of incredible protection and strength. Silence guards you from unnecessary conflict. It helps you rise above gossip, arguments, and people who try to pull you into their emotional storms. There is power in not reacting, in choosing to remain calm when provoked, quiet when attacked, and still when misunderstood. Silence allows you to keep your power, instead of handing it over to those who thrive on chaos. It also helps you avoid making decisions out of anger or pride. In silence, you process your feelings before you speak, and you align your response with wisdom instead of impulse. Silence gives you space to pray before you respond, and in that prayer, God gives you clarity. You start to see that silence is not passive. It's intentional. It's an act of maturity. When you stop explaining yourself to those who don't want to understand, and stop defending your choices to people who were never for you, you reclaim your time and energy for things that actually matter. Your peace becomes your boundary. In the quiet, you also become more productive. Focusing on yourself in silence removes distractions, helping you build with purpose. You're no longer announcing every plan, seeking approval, or proving your worth. Instead, you move in silence, planning, growing, and rising in your own lane. You begin to value the power of privacy. Not everything needs to be shared. Your vision doesn't need validation, and your progress doesn't need applause. The more you move silently, the more you realize that results speak louder than words. People notice the fruit of your discipline even if they never saw the process, and that's the beauty of silent growth. It's quiet but impactful. You work on your dreams without needing an audience. You heal without broadcasting your pain. You evolve without needing credit. And that kind of silent progress is unshakable because it's rooted in real, personal work. Another powerful benefit of silence is spiritual alignment. When you're not constantly speaking, reacting, or chasing noise, you finally have space to hear God clearly. In the silence, your spirit becomes still enough to sense His guidance. You begin to pray with more depth and listen with more sensitivity. Silence creates room for divine downloads. Those quiet instructions, warnings, and confirmations that only come when you're not too busy talking. You become more aware of His presence and more confident in His timing. Your silence becomes a sanctuary where your faith is strengthened. You learn to trust that you don't always have to defend yourself, because God will. You don't always have to speak, because your fruit will. And you don't always have to rush, because what's meant for you will never miss you. Focusing on yourself and staying silent turns you into a person of depth, purpose, and quiet power. Someone who doesn't need noise to prove their worth, because they know who they are and whose they are. Focusing on yourself gives you the freedom to detach from the expectations of others and truly reconnect with your inner purpose. In a world that often pushes you to keep performing, pleasing, and pretending, choosing to focus inward is an act of liberation. It's where you start to remove the pressure to meet society's standards and instead realign with God's purpose for your life. You begin to examine your habits, your motives, and your beliefs. You start to understand that not everything you've been told is right for you is truly in alignment with your spiritual and emotional well-being. As you spend time with yourself, you uncover hidden potential, neglected dreams, and wounds that still need healing. You learn to be honest with yourself, and in that honesty you find transformation. You no longer make decisions to impress others. You begin choosing what nourishes your soul, what brings you closer to peace, and what reflects the person you are becoming. This self-awareness becomes a foundation for deeper growth, allowing you to live more intentionally, love more purely, and lead with quiet confidence. Silence plays a powerful role in this transformation. When you stay silent, you take back your power from people who manipulate, provoke, or try to control your narrative. Silence becomes a weapon against gossip, envy, and drama. Not every insult deserves a reply. Not every false statement requires a correction. Sometimes, the most powerful response is no response at all. Silence allows you to rise above. It becomes a mirror to those who try to harm you, exposing their intentions while you maintain your dignity. You begin to understand that your silence can carry a message of strength louder than any defense. It communicates that your peace matters more than their opinion. You no longer allow your emotions to be controlled by others' behavior. Instead, you create space to breathe, reflect, and pray. Your silence becomes your sanctuary, a place where God can whisper wisdom and peace into your heart. In silence, you build emotional discipline, and that makes you unshakable. When you focus on yourself and stay silent, your discernment becomes sharper. You begin to see through fake friendships, manipulative conversations, and surface-level connections. You no longer feel the need to be everywhere, say everything, or engage in every discussion. You start to understand that silence gives you clarity. It filters out the noise so you can hear what really matters: your intuition, your convictions, and God's direction. You observe more than you speak. You listen deeply. You take in information and use it wisely. Silence makes you strategic. You no longer waste energy on battles that aren't yours to fight. You learn to walk away from what disrupts your peace, not because you're weak, but because you're focused. When people question your silence, you don't feel the need to explain, because your growth speaks for itself. Focusing on yourself also teaches you the importance of boundaries. You stop feeling guilty for saying no. You stop shrinking yourself to make others comfortable. You begin to understand that protecting your peace is not selfish, it's necessary. As you grow in self-awareness, you begin to attract better experiences, healthier people, and more aligned opportunities. You become intentional about your time, your energy, and your space. You realize that not everyone deserves access to you. You don't have to be available to everyone. and you don't have to explain why. Silence becomes your guardrail. It protects you from oversharing, overcommitting, and overstressing. It allows you to rest, reset, and refocus. It gives you control over your environment and helps you stay rooted in purpose. The more you focus on yourself, the more you learn to trust your process, even if it's slow, quiet, and unseen by others. In that sacred, quiet place of focus and silence, you begin to grow spiritually. You begin to recognize the voice of God in ways you hadn't before. You become more sensitive to His presence and more obedient to His instructions. Your silent moments become powerful moments of revelation. You don't need to broadcast your faith. It becomes evident in the way you live, the peace you carry, and the wisdom you show. You understand that God often works in silence too. He doesn't always announce what He's about to do. Sometimes He just moves and everything changes. In your silence, you align with that divine pattern. You learn to be still and trust, knowing that your quiet season is not a wasted season. It's a time of building, pruning, strengthening, and preparing for what's next. And when the time is right, all that you've worked on silently will bloom, not for the applause, but for the glory of the one who was with you in every silent step. Focusing on yourself helps you reclaim your time, energy, and attention from people and situations that don't contribute to your growth. When you stop chasing after others' approval and begin looking inward, you develop a strong sense of identity. You are no longer driven by the need to fit in or to be liked. Instead, you start embracing your uniqueness, your journey, and your pace. You stop comparing yourself to others because you begin to understand that what God is doing in your life is specific to your calling. This self-focus becomes a form of healing. You revisit the parts of you that were ignored, overlooked, or suppressed and begin nurturing them. You acknowledge your pain, process your emotions, and start showing up for yourself in ways you used to expect others to. This makes you more resilient. You learn to depend on God for strength and on yourself for discipline. You learn that you are enough, not because of anything external, but because of who you are within. As your awareness grows, so does your confidence. You realize you can move forward without fanfare, and that your value isn't tied to being seen. It's in being whole. Choosing to stay silent while focusing on yourself gives you time to reflect deeply without the pressure to respond, defend, or perform. Silence becomes a tool of transformation. You begin to understand that not every situation needs your voice. Sometimes it just needs your patience. Silence creates a buffer between impulse and wisdom. It allows you to hold your tongue when emotions run high, giving you the time and clarity to respond instead of react. In this silence, you begin to listen to your surroundings, your heart, and God more carefully. You recognize the power in restraint. You no longer feel obligated to explain yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Instead, you guard your peace, knowing that what is built in silence is often stronger than what is shouted aloud. You learn the strength of observation, of watching people's actions instead of being distracted by their words. Silence grants you control over your emotions, and with that control, you become wiser, more grounded, and less shaken by the storms around you. As you stay quiet and turn inward, you begin to realize how much energy you've previously given to distractions, arguments, and empty conversations. You start filtering your environment. You unfollow the noise, both literally and spiritually. You protect your space by becoming selective with your time, your thoughts, and your company. You realize that your peace is too precious to be shared with chaos. Focusing on yourself means setting limits, emotional, physical, and even digital. It's understanding that rest is not laziness, solitude is not loneliness, and quiet is not emptiness. It is in these quiet moments that you restore your energy, gain clarity, and refuel your passion for the things that matter. You begin to see that silence is not a void, but a vessel that holds purpose, clarity, and power. You fill that space with meaningful reflection, focused goals, and prayerful direction. The quiet gives you the opportunity to realign with God's voice instead of the voices of the world. Another powerful realization that comes with focusing on yourself and remaining silent is that not everything needs to be shared. We live in a world that glorifies oversharing and constant exposure, where everyone feels pressured to showcase every win, every move, every thought. But when you move in silence, you begin to see the value of privacy. You understand that progress doesn't need an announcement. Your victories don't need applause. What matters most is that you are growing in ways that are real even if they are unseen. Silence shields your plans from negativity, jealousy, and interference. You no longer feel the need to prove anything. You find security in knowing that the right people will recognize your growth when the time is right, and the wrong people never needed to know in the first place. This mindset brings peace and focus. It keeps your energy concentrated on building rather than broadcasting. Focusing on yourself also sharpens your spiritual sensitivity. When you're constantly surrounded by noise, emotional, digital, or relational, it becomes harder to hear the gentle whispers of God. But when you practice silence, you create space for divine guidance to come through. You begin to pray not just with words, but with a listening heart. You wait before making decisions. You pause before responding. You consult God more than people. And in that spiritual stillness, He begins to reveal things to you, truths, warnings, confirmations, and instructions. You realize that staying silent isn't just about being quiet. It's about being available to hear from the one who knows the full picture. You don't need to rush to explain your story when you trust that God is still writing it. You don't need to defend your reputation when you trust that God is your vindicator. Silence becomes a spiritual weapon, one that guards your faith, protects your peace, and keeps your heart aligned with heaven's timing. The final aspect of this journey is the realization that your greatest breakthroughs often happen in private. The tears, the healing, the decisions, the sacrifices, most of them happen when no one is watching. And that's okay, because when you focus on yourself and stay silent, you're not looking for applause. You're looking for alignment. You're building not for public approval, but for personal integrity and spiritual purpose. You learn that the most powerful transformations are often the quietest. There's no need to shout about change. You'll live it. People will see it in your peace, your strength, your glow, and your choices. What begins in silence will eventually speak for itself, and it will speak loudly. Focusing on yourself allows you to prioritize your healing without external pressure. Life often moves so quickly that we don't take time to process our emotional wounds, past disappointments, or internal struggles. When you turn your focus inward, you finally begin to face the things you've been avoiding. You stop running from your pain and start addressing it with maturity and honesty. You realize that healing is not just about forgetting. It's about understanding, releasing, and learning from what hurt you. As you make this shift, you begin to break unhealthy cycles that were rooted in unhealed parts of yourself. You become aware of the triggers, behaviors, and beliefs that have been holding you back. With that awareness, you begin to make better choices for your future. This personal healing process isn't loud. It's quiet, sacred, and often unseen by others. But it is powerful. It creates a solid foundation for growth that can't be shaken by external circumstances. You start to show up in your life with more confidence, clarity, and calm because you've done the internal work. That kind of transformation only happens when you focus on yourself and give yourself the space to heal without distraction or judgment. Staying silent during your healing journey is crucial. Silence gives you a safe space to reflect without interruption. It allows you to listen to your own heart, to God's voice, and to the wisdom that comes from within. So often, people speak before they've fully processed what they're going through, and that can lead to confusion, regret, or even more pain. But when you choose silence, you're not avoiding your emotions. You're giving them room to breathe. You're allowing yourself to feel deeply without the need to explain or justify. Silence becomes a form of protection, guarding your healing process from unnecessary opinions or criticism. Not everyone deserves access to your vulnerable moments. Some seasons are meant to be private. In your silence, you are able to cry, pray, write, and release in peace. You don't need to seek validation or advice from every person around you. Instead, you go directly to God, trusting Him to comfort, guide, and restore you. Over time, you discover that silence is not empty. It's full of revelation, recovery, and restoration. As you focus on yourself, your standards begin to rise. You no longer entertain things that drain your energy or distract you from your purpose. You become more intentional about who you allow into your space and how you spend your time. You realize that peace is too expensive to be compromised for temporary attention, shallow relationships, or surface-level conversations. You start to walk away from things that once had control over you: habits, addictions, people, patterns. And you do so without announcing it. There's no need to prove your worth to anyone. You simply live with a new level of discernment. This personal refinement comes from focusing inward. You don't wait for others to change. You change. You stop waiting for the apology, the closure, or the understanding. You give it to yourself. You choose peace over pride. You choose progress over proving. You begin building a life that aligns with your values, vision, and faith. And that alignment becomes more important than anyone's opinion. Silence supports this evolution by giving you room to grow in privacy. Growth doesn't always look impressive at first. Sometimes it looks like discipline, distance, and discomfort. But when you remain silent, you protect that process. You're not distracted by applause or discouraged by criticism. You stay focused. You rise before the sun, pray in quiet places, and put in work that no one sees. You make sacrifices that others don't understand. You embrace stillness not as stagnation, but as preparation. And when growth begins to show, in your decisions, your character, and your peace, it speaks for itself. Silence keeps your journey pure. It helps you avoid becoming performative. You don't grow to be admired. You grow to be fulfilled. You build silently because you know God is watching even when no one else is. And His approval is worth more than any platform or praise. As you grow, you also begin to build emotional independence. You no longer need constant reassurance or validation. You find security in who you are becoming and in who God says you are. You stop relying on the outside world to tell you how to feel or what to do. Instead, you consult your inner compass, your faith, your wisdom, your values. This internal grounding brings unshakable peace. Even when storms come, you don't fall apart like you used to, because you've built something solid within. Focusing on yourself teaches you how to regulate your emotions, how to speak kindly to yourself, and how to trust your own decisions. Silence plays a key role here too. It creates distance between stimulus and response. You don't explode when triggered. You pause. You breathe. You reflect. And from that silence, you choose your words carefully, or sometimes not at all, because not everything needs a reaction. Some things simply need to be released and left to God. Focusing on yourself and staying silent also gives you the time and clarity to pursue your goals with discipline. Without the distractions of other people's drama or expectations, you gain mental space to envision the life you truly want. You begin to see the importance of consistency, patience, and planning. You no longer operate on urgency or emotion. You operate on vision. You write down your goals, commit to your growth, and move forward one step at a time. There's no need to rush. You trust the process. You understand that what's built slowly lasts longer, and because you're silent, you protect your progress from premature exposure. You don't let others talk you out of your dreams. You stay grounded, focused, and faithful even when no one's watching. Finally, when you focus on yourself and stay silent, you allow God to elevate you in His timing. You stop forcing doors open and instead wait for what is divinely aligned. You realize that silence is not just about self-discipline. It's about surrender. You let go of control. You stop trying to manipulate outcomes and instead trust in God's sovereignty. In your silence, you pray more, worry less, and listen more closely to His voice. You begin to walk by faith, not by sight. And when the time comes, everything you built in the dark, the healing, the growth, the strength, will come to light, not for recognition, but as a testimony to what God can do in someone who chooses stillness, focus, and faith. Focusing on yourself helps you become more intentional about your growth and more aware of your life's direction. It shifts your perspective from simply existing to living with purpose. When you turn inward and pay attention to your own journey, you begin to discover who you are beyond titles, relationships, and responsibilities. You stop allowing the opinions of others to dictate your identity. You begin to operate from a place of self-awareness instead of insecurity. You start asking deeper questions. Not, what do they want from me? But what do I need for me to grow, heal, and thrive? You reflect on what brings you joy, what gives you peace, and what feels aligned with your spirit. As you do this, you step away from patterns of overgiving, overthinking, and overcommitting. You focus on creating a life that feels right inwardly, not just looks good outwardly. You let go of distractions and drama and shift your energy to healing, learning, and becoming the person God has called you to be. Silence plays a vital role in this process. When you choose silence, you are making a powerful decision to protect your peace and your process. You are no longer in a hurry to explain yourself, defend your decisions, or respond to every challenge that comes your way. You realize that not everything deserves your energy, and not everyone deserves your words. Silence becomes your filter. It keeps you from speaking in anger, reacting in pain, or engaging with people who are not aligned with your growth. It gives you space to think, breathe, and pray before you act. You no longer move from a place of urgency. You move from a place of wisdom. In silence, you gather strength. You process your emotions. You reconnect with your spiritual center. And from that space, your decisions become clearer, your peace becomes deeper, and your life becomes more focused. You no longer waste energy proving your worth. You simply live in alignment with it. Focusing on yourself creates space for emotional healing that you can't access when you're distracted by the needs and demands of others. It gives you the freedom to go back to the root of your pain and begin addressing it without shame or pressure. You start to understand why certain things trigger you, why certain patterns repeat, and why you've held on to certain fears or insecurities. This self-awareness is the key to lasting transformation. Instead of suppressing your emotions or blaming others, you take responsibility for your healing. You stop avoiding your wounds and start tending to them with patience and grace. You give yourself permission to feel, to forgive, and to move forward. Not for anyone else, but for your own freedom. You become more emotionally intelligent, more in control of your responses, and more compassionate with yourself and others. Silence supports this emotional healing by giving you the space to feel without being judged. In silence, you can cry, pray, and release in private. You can take your time processing pain without needing to package it for public consumption. You realize that not every wound needs to be spoken about. Some need to be surrendered to God in the quiet. Silence becomes a sacred space where restoration happens. It becomes a cocoon where your soul can rest, reset, and rise. You no longer overshare with people who don't have the capacity to handle your truth. You no longer explain your healing process to people who haven't earned the right to hear it. You protect your journey and allow God to work on you in private, knowing that true healing doesn't need to be broadcasted. Focusing on yourself teaches you the discipline of consistency. You begin to realize that success, healing, and peace aren't created in grand, public moments, but in small, private decisions made day after day. You start building routines, setting goals, and developing habits that align with the life you want. You no longer rely on motivation or emotion. You rely on discipline and faith. You stop quitting on yourself every time things get uncomfortable. You stay committed, even when no one is watching or applauding. You become your own accountability partner. This consistency begins to reshape your mind, rewire your habits, and redefine your lifestyle. You develop a quiet confidence that doesn't need praise to stay motivated because you know who you are, where you're going, and why it matters. Silence amplifies this discipline. It keeps you from getting distracted by comparison, criticism, or confusion. It helps you stay focused on your lane, your timing, and your vision. You don't waste time watching what others are doing or explaining what you're doing. You put your head down and do the work. Faithfully, quietly, and diligently. You trust that what you're building in the silence will one day speak for itself. You're no longer driven by urgency, but by purpose. You're no longer moved by noise, but by direction. Focusing on yourself empowers you to take control of your choices. You stop living passively, letting life happen to you, and start making intentional decisions that move you toward growth. You choose what you consume, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. You choose who you surround yourself with. You choose what to give your attention to. You stop waiting for someone to rescue or validate you. You step into ownership of your life, your calling, and your responsibility to grow. You let go of victimhood and embrace victory. You learn to say no without guilt and yes without fear. You become someone who is no longer easily swayed or manipulated because you know where you stand and what you stand for. Silence gives you the mental clarity to make those choices. When you're constantly surrounded by voices, social media, opinions, pressure, it's easy to lose sight of your path. But silence helps you sort through the noise and hear what truly matters. It helps you remember your goals, refocus your attention, and realign your steps. You learn to sit in stillness long enough to hear God's whisper, and in that whisper, you find the direction that noise will never give you. Finally, focusing on yourself and remaining silent transforms you into someone who moves with quiet strength. You don't need to explain your process, defend your decisions, or prove your value. You live from a place of inner peace and divine alignment. You become grounded, not in ego but in purpose. People begin to notice the glow, the calm, and the confidence that surrounds you, not because you made noise, but because you made progress. You learn that the most powerful shifts in life happen in silence, and the most profound victories are the ones that happen within. And so you focus, you grow, you rise silently, steadily, faithfully.